Poor girl gets kicked out of a jewelry store for not being able to afford it, until a millionaire shows up and shocks everyone. The eyes of the jewelry store turn to her like invisible blades. The young woman in a simple dress, worn sandals and trembling hands held a necklace as if clutching a forbidden dream. Before she could even ask the price, the attendant snatched the piece from her hands with polite brutality and a sharp voice. "This isn't for you." The dense silence was broken by muffled giggles from customers watching the spectacle of humiliation. An unnecessarily harsh security guard escorted her to the door as if she were a criminal. Outside, the busy street seemed to laugh along, reflecting her image in the window, small, broken, exposed. A tear fell, but it wasn't just sadness. There was also a hidden spark, a silent glint in her eyes that no one noticed. And it was in that moment, in this public portrait of contempt, that fate decided to place an unexpected spectator on the scene, someone whose power could turn all the rules upside down. A man in an impeccable suit, with a cold gaze and an unshakable bearing, walked down the sidewalk. His name was familiar from newspapers, magazine covers, and the whispers of million-dollar businesses. A tycoon who bought companies like someone collecting rare coins. Seeing the scene, he stopped. A slight, ironic smile appeared on his lips, as if recognizing a play he'd rehearsed countless times. The strong, crushing the weak. But upon entering the jewelry store, silence was immediate. Without looking at anyone, he pointed to the piece that had been snatched from her hands and said, "I want that necklace, but only if it's given to her." A shock rippled through the room like an electric wave. The glances that had previously scorned her were now mingled with shame and astonishment. The girl, still motionless in the doorway, felt her world spin. The same man the crowd revered had just brought them all to their knees without a single word of explanation. If this scene has already made you feel the shame, injustice, and unexpected twists that life can bring, don't miss it. Subscribe to the channel now to follow each new story that touches your heart and exposes the power of destiny. Leave a like to further strengthen this space where we reveal that no one stays on the ground forever. And write in the comments, do you believe that justice comes at the right time, even when everyone seems against you? Your answer may inspire others who are also living their own silent battles. The window display reflected more than just glittering jewels. It also reflected the social distance that separated worlds within the same city. The jewelry store's ambiance was one of quiet ostentation, sparkling chandeliers, impeccable display cases, salespeople trained to size up customers in seconds, with a look that decided whether someone deserved respect or contempt. Inside, the air reeked of exclusivity, and every movement was rehearsed as if on a stage where only the powerful had the right to applaud. Among the patrons, ladies with designer handbags and men in tailored suits, her contrast was stark. A simple cotton dress, her hair tied back haphazardly, and a look that blended enchantment with shyness. With every step, it seemed the ground was taking a toll on her for daring to exist there. The murmur of conversations faded as she passed, and the attendants exchanged quick glances, followed by restrained smiles. There was a kind of silent judgment in the air, as if her presence were a miscalculation of reality. As she walked between the windows, her heart raced not only from the beauty of the pieces, but from the fear of being exposed, of not belonging. The jewelry reflected in her eyes like impossible dreams, flashes of a life that seemed to exist only in fairy tales or magazines she would never buy. Yet there was something about her that drew attention, a strength, hidden beneath her apparent fragility. As if she carried a truth no one there could decipher, a secret kept deep within her soul. And it was in this contrast, the artificial shine of luxury against the discreet light of her dignity, that the two worlds about to collide braced themselves for impact. The millionaire, who had not yet taken his first step into that scene, watched from afar. The room seemed to spin in slow motion, every detail of the store gaining symbolic weight, preparing the ground for the first movement of fate. Her past was like a mosaic of silent pain that no one in the jewelry store could have imagined. She was born in a small rural town, the daughter of a single mother, who worked 3 jobs to put food on the table and keep a roof, however precarious, over their heads. She never knew her father, and every time she dared ask about him, her mother gave her only a silence filled with old hurts. She grew up in a simple house with peeling walls, inherited furniture, and a childhood marked by absences. No gifts, no comfort, no certainty about the future. Yet there was a stubborn flame within her, a hope that would not be extinguished. At school, she was the one who always sat in the back, not out of shyness, but because she knew that her hand-me-down clothes and reused notebooks exposed her to the cruel laughter of her classmates. She learned early on to swallow tears and transform what she wanted to scream into silence. As a teenager, she lost her mother to a sudden illness, and what little they had was wiped out by overdue bills and debts. Suddenly she found herself alone in the world, working temporary jobs, waiting tables in restaurants where she was invisible, cleaning houses where she experienced the luxurious lives of families who didn't even remember her name. It was in these environments that she learned 2 painful lessons. First, that society wears masks to hide its cruelty. Second, that dignity is not measured by clothes or money. She kept a memory of her mother deep in her heart. "You are more valuable than any gold. Don't let the world make you believe otherwise." This simple and almost forgotten phrase was what sustained her when life seemed to crush her. Over time, she moved to the big city in search of opportunities, but the reality was even harsher. Low wages, suffocating rent, suspicious looks for always wearing simple clothes, always looking out of place. Still, each night she went to bed with a secret promise. One day she would no longer be the girl humiliated by shop windows, not because she desired wealth, but because she wanted to prove to herself that she belonged in the world, that she had the right to exist without carrying the constant weight of exclusion. What she didn't know, however, was that her story was about to intersect with someone who represented the exact opposite of everything she'd experienced: power, luxury, arrogance. And this encounter wouldn't be just a coincidence, but a silent twist of fate, setting the stage for a twist that would forever change not only her life, but also that of the man who thought he could buy everything. That afternoon, the jewelry store seemed like a stage set for a cruel spectacle. Amid the hushed aisles where the wealthy scrutinized necklaces like ripe fruit, a whispered conversation turned into a challenge. 2 young heirs, known for their arrogance at parties and private clubs, were betting on who could quickest expose the illusion of the girl who had dared enter that temple of luxury. "She could never afford anything here. Look at her outfit. Let's see how bold she can be," one of them said, laughing. The other added, "I bet you $100 that in less than 5 minutes she'll be thrown out." The attendant, an unwitting accomplice, had already received discreet signals, the perfect opportunity to display loyalty to high-powered clients. Thus, when the young woman reached out to touch the necklace, the humiliation unfolded. Like part of a well-rehearsed play. It wasn't just spontaneous contempt, it was a bet. Her presence had been transformed into a game, a public spectacle of superiority. Every glance turned to laugh at the situation also carried the poison of complicity. Her heart, though pounding with shame, began to decipher the invisible gears that drove that moment. It wasn't about money, it was about power. She had been chosen as the target of a cruel joke, and it made her blood boil. She swallowed the pain. Silently, but kept a gleam in her eyes, knowing that this would not be forgotten. Not only because of the humiliation, but because of the weight of the bet that had transformed her dignity into a currency of amusement. And it was this detail, the secret of the bet, that would give the story an even more devastating weight, because the millionaire, observing everything from a distance, had no idea that at that moment he was not only witnessing an injustice, but also the beginning of a larger game, a game that would forever change the position of every piece on the board of life. Their first contact wasn't a gesture of kindness, nor a light-hearted exchange. It was a clash of worlds, a silent collision between 2 realities that should never intersect. When he entered the jewelry store and asked for the necklace to be delivered to her, the air seemed to split in 2. The sound of the request echoed like an indisputable command, and the employees, who minutes before had been laughing at her, now moved hurriedly, confused between obedience and shame. The girl, however, didn't move. She remained motionless in the doorway, as if in disbelief. His gaze found hers through the reflections in the display window, steady, penetrating, cold as steel. There was no smile of kindness, no explicit compassion, only an enigmatic, almost challenging interest. She hesitated to accept, but when the necklace was placed in her hands, she felt the weight not only of the gold, but of the humiliation, disguised as a gift. She approached him, unable to understand why such a powerful man would choose to intervene in a scene so small to him, yet devastating to her. "Why?" she asked softly, almost a whisper that only he could hear. He inclined his head slightly and replied without changing his calm tone, "Because no one should decide who deserves to dream." The sentence, though charged with impact, sounded strange, almost contradictory, coming from someone whose fortune was built on decisions. That always excluded the weakest. The silence between them stretched for seconds that seemed eternal. She wanted to thank him, but also wanted to shout that she didn't need arms. He, in turn, observed her with something rare, genuine curiosity. It wasn't desire nor pity. It was the feeling that this young woman, with her simple clothes and eyes marked by the resistance of pain, hid something that not even he, with all his power, could buy. In that instant, the world around them disappeared. There were no customers, no attendants, no gamblers laughing in the background. There were just the two of them, in a silent duel of pride and mystery. He, the millionaire accustomed to buying whatever he wanted. She, the girl who wouldn't let shame shatter her essence. And so, at first contact, not a bridge was formed, but a field of tension. A silent promise that this was just beginning. The public humiliation didn't end at the jewelry store. In fact, it was there that it gained an even bigger stage. The moment the necklace was handed to her should have silenced the laughter, but the cruelty of those watching found another way. As she left, clutching the box with trembling hands, she heard behind her the muffled laughter of the two heirs who had initiated the bet. One of them, in a loud, mocking voice, blurted out, "Look, you've won a consolation prize. Now you can pawn it and pay the back rent." The comment echoed through the room and reached the street, where curious pedestrians stopped to watch the scene. In a matter of seconds, the crowd transformed the young woman into a spectacle, as if it were funny to watch someone poor being put in an uncomfortable position. The millionaire was still there, watching. He didn't move a muscle, didn't say anything, just watched. Her silence before the audience was almost unbearable, but she didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't return the necklace. She walked with firm steps, even though her heart was breaking. With every meter she covered, she felt the weight of the stares, the whispered words, the surreptitious cell phones pointed at, as if her pain were free content for others' amusement. Just across the street, someone stuck out their foot, trying to trip her. She almost fell, but regained her balance and walked on, chin held high. This small detail became fuel for more laughter, as if her dignity were a public toy. The collective contempt was like a tide. It wasn't just the jewelry store that rejected her. It was the entire city that seemed to reinforce that she didn't belong in that world. The millionaire, accustomed to dictating rules and controlling narratives, saw something he didn't understand, her silent strength in enduring everything without breaking. There were no public tears, no pleading, only a silence charged with dignity, the same silence that was beginning to ironically expose the vulgarity of those who ridiculed her. As she walked away, the laughter subsided, replaced by an unease few would admit to feeling. It was as if somehow the collective contempt had lost its strength in the face of this young woman's firmness. And for him, the millionaire, the spectacle of humiliation that had begun as a distraction, had become something that would haunt him, a puzzle that could not be explained by wealth or power. She knew. From the first moment the clerk snatched the necklace from her hands, she noticed the exchanged glances, the barely suppressed giggles, the vibration of a secret shared by the boys in the back of the store. It wasn't just gratuitous humiliation. There was a dirty game afoot, a bet that had turned her presence there into a spectacle. And that was what hurt most. Not the poverty, not the explicit contempt, but the knowledge that she was serving as a distraction, a disposable piece in a cruel theatre. Days later, when the opportunity arose, she let out in cold words what she'd been keeping inside. "Do you think I didn't notice? That I didn't understand every glance exchanged, every hidden smile? You bet on my dignity, and you won for a few moments, but I'll never forget who laughed." These words, spoken calmly and without a single tear, cut through the air like invisible blades. The boys who had previously laughed in public felt the weight of the revelation. The millionaire, who until then had remained a mere observer, was struck by something new: discomfort. Accustomed to controlling every narrative, he realized he had overlooked the cruelest detail of the entire scene. Her strength lay precisely in not having been mistaken, in having kept the venom hidden in her eyes until the right moment. By revealing that she knew everything, she sought neither pity nor immediate revenge. She sought only to return to the world the reflection of her own contempt. And in that moment, even those who had laughed in secret felt the weight of public shame. It was as if the entire room had become a silent courtroom, and she, the humiliated young woman, was the only voice who didn't need to shout to be heard. The secret came like a chink in the millionaire's perfect armor. Until that moment, she was just an intriguing stranger, a young woman with the wounded dignity and quiet strength in her eyes of someone who had faced far more than public humiliation. But all it took was a stray piece of information, a detail from her past, for him to discover that the girl had roots much deeper in his own history than he could have imagined. A former business partner during a casual meeting mentioned her mother's name in a conversation about old debts. The curious millionaire dug deeper and found forgotten records. That simple woman who had raised her daughter alone had, years ago, worked at one of the companies he had acquired in his youth as an investor. Worse still, she had been fired during a massive layoff he himself had approved, without even looking at the names, unaware that one of those layoffs had changed the fate of a child. Her mother had written a letter to the board, never answered, asking for a chance to keep her job because she had a young daughter. This request was ignored amid numbers and reports, and the family's life plunged even deeper into poverty. Discovering this was like looking into a distorted mirror. That girl who faced the world in simple clothes was, in fact, the direct result of a decision he had made years earlier, coldly and hastily. The secret of her past connected her to him in an inescapable way, as if fate had planned every detail so that one day they would cross paths. Suddenly, the millionaire's arrogance lost its strength. The necklace, the bet, the public scene, everything seemed small compared to the revelation that this young woman bore the scars of a mistake he had helped create. It wasn't coincidence, it was karma. And for the first time in a long time, he felt the weight of guilt. She disappeared as if dissolving into thin air. She didn't leave notes, didn't respond to messages, didn't return to the places where she used to spend her free time. She simply vanished. For her, that escape was more than necessary. It was a way to regain her dignity, to distance herself from a universe that seemed to toy with her pain. For him, however, her absence was an unexpected blow. Accustomed to having the world in the palm of his hand, to finding people with the snap of his fingers, he discovered that this girl wasn't like the others. She didn't appear in society columns. Her profiles weren't exposed on social media. She wasn't at parties where the spotlight might betray her. It was like searching for a shadow in the middle of the night. At first, he tried to convince himself it didn't matter, that there were thousands of women more beautiful, richer, easier to find. But the days passed, and the memory of her didn't fade. On the contrary, every detail of the scene, the firm gaze in the face of humiliation, the silent words that seemed to pierce his pride, the mystery of the past that now bore the weight of his own guilt, grew within him like a wound that would not heal. In the void she left, he began to notice the noise of his own life, automatic meetings, empty parties, purchased applause. Everything rang false. He discovered that he missed not the silence of luxury cars, nor the clinking of crystal glasses, but the only presence that had dared to face him with dignity. Her absence was not merely uncomfortable, it was transformative. For the first time, The millionaire felt the bitter taste of what he had always provoked in others, the feeling of loss, of exclusion, of being on the outside looking in. And the greatest irony was that he, with all his power and wealth, could not bring back someone who had simply decided to disappear. The downfall began almost imperceptibly, like a discreet crack in an expensive mirror. At first it was just rumors, gossip columns insinuating that the millionaire had humiliated a young woman in the middle of a jewelry store, anonymous witnesses reporting the scene online, poorly recorded videos circulating in closed groups. Gradually, the story took shape. It didn't matter that he had bought the necklace for her. The narrative that gained traction was that of a cruel bet, of collective humiliation, of the image of a man who, despite his fortune, had reveled in the dignity of someone poor. Newspapers, which had previously extolled his millionaire business dealings, now plastered his photo with headlines that insinuated arrogance, abuse of power, and coldness. Investors began to question his public image, contracts were suspended, and invitations to events evaporated. It was as if the city, which had once revered him, had decided to demand payment for all the years he had lived above the ordinary rules. And the final blow came during a public meeting with shareholders, when one of the audience's voices rose and asked sharply, "Is it true that you turned a young woman's life into entertainment?" The heavy silence that followed was more devastating than any formal accusation. The man who controlled entire rooms with his charisma now had no answer. His reputation, built over decades, began to crumble in days. Friends disappeared, sycophants fell silent, and loneliness began to follow him like a constant shadow. It was social judgment at its most relentless. There was no court, no judges, but the sentence was in every glance that avoided him, in every door that closed. For the first time, she felt the bitter taste of public shame, the same one she had endured alone that afternoon. Karma, silently, was beginning to be fulfilled before everyone's eyes. The transformation didn't come all at once, but in slow waves that ate away at him from within. The millionaire, accustomed to measuring everything in numbers and results, found himself facing a void that money couldn't fill. The mansion seemed too cold, the dinners tasteless, the parties unbearably noisy. The people around him now treated him with the cautious distance of someone unwilling to be associated with a tarnished reputation. For the first time, he wasn't the one looking down on others, but rather the one who felt their gazes silently judging him. He spent hours reliving the moment he saw her leave the jewelry store, carrying not just a necklace, but the weight of an entire audience condemning her. He began to understand the meaning of dignity, something that can never be bought. And in the process, he revisited his own memories, his past decisions, including the one that had changed her mother's life. He read the letter a forgotten employee had kept in the archives, and every word seemed written against his soul. Humble pleas, hope to be heard, the memory of a young daughter who depended on him. This shattered the last walls that still protected him. He discovered he was human, fragile, full of flaws he never wanted to see. He began to frequent places he had previously ignored. Streets, where families lived on meager living, charities, shelters, not for self-promotion, but because he needed to understand what he had never seen. In the silences of these visits, he began to feel something new, true compassion. The man who had previously bought respect now sought to reclaim it within himself. There was no longer arrogance in his gestures, nor the rush to be seen. Only an inner urgency remained, to find that girl again. Not to repair his public image, but to look into her eyes and tell her what he had never told anyone, that for the first time in his life he had learned the value of the priceless. Their reunion took place in an unlikely place, far from the luxurious salons and far from the memory of the jewelry store. He found her at a community center, helping children with their homework, sitting on a simple chair, smiling in a way that no longer carried the weight of shame. The scene disarmed him. The woman who had once been expelled amid laughter was now a reference. Say to other lives, someone who offered hope amidst nothingness. When she saw him, there was no surprise or astonishment, only a silence full of meaning. He approached slowly, as if afraid of breaking something precious, and for the first time his eyes were not cold. There was no arrogance in his tone when he said, "I looked for you." She looked at him firmly, as if already aware of this search, and replied without changing her voice, "You didn't have to." The weight of her words was greater than any accusation. He tried to explain, tried to justify his change, spoke of the guilt, the sleepless nights, the emptiness he had discovered without her presence. But she didn't interrupt, just listened, letting each confession echo in the space. When silence returned, there were no tears in her eyes, no resentment. There was only a calm that disconcerted him, a strength beyond his control. And in that moment, he understood that he wasn't there to be forgiven, but to learn. The reunion wasn't automatic redemption. It was a mirror where he finally saw who he truly was. The man who thought he controlled everything now depended on a decision beyond his control. She let him speak until silence once again dominated the space between them. The millionaire, now stripped of his arrogance, seemed smaller, almost an ordinary man. His eyes searched hers for some sign of absolution, but found only firmness. She took a deep breath, as if carrying years of accumulated pain, and said calmly, "I don't harbor hatred for you. If I did, I would remain trapped in that day, in that scene, in that bet. But I also have no obligation to forgive you. What happened shaped who I am, and I chose to move on without you." The words fell like silent hammer blows. He lowered his eyes, feeling the weight of a sentence that came not with shouts, but with the cutting serenity of truth. She continued, "You held the world in your hands and never knew the value of what truly matters. I can't go back in time. I can't bring my mother back. I can't erase the days I was humiliated. But I can choose. And I choose not to live as the shadow of someone who once saw me as entertainment." There was no anger, no theatrics, only an almost painful clarity. His heart broke into silent pieces, for he understood that he would lose not only forgiveness but also the chance to rebuild something with her. Yet there was a spark of gratitude, because amidst her refusal, she was giving him back the lesson he would never learn alone. Dignity isn't begged for, it's earned. She stood, arranged the papers on the table, and before leaving, left one last sentence, loaded with symbolism. "The necklace you gave me, I didn't keep it for luxury. I kept it to remind myself that I am not what they laughed at me that day. I am so much more." And she departed, leaving him there, surrounded by the silence that hurt more than any judgmental crowd. The next night, the city shone with artificial lights, but he walked. The streets alone, without security, without cars, without anyone. He passed the same jewelry store where it all began. The windows sparkled as before, but now they seemed empty, devoid of meaning. He stopped before the glass and saw his own reflection, a man in an expensive suit, but with tired eyes and a countenance that no longer inspired respect, only silence. Inside the store, another customer was trying on a bracelet, laughing loudly, surrounded by fawning glances. The scene was identical to the one he himself had played out so many times, and now it seemed grotesque. From his pocket he took a small envelope. Inside was an old photo he had discovered among her mother's files, the letter that had once been ignored. He folded the paper carefully, as if recognizing he held something sacred, and dropped it discreetly in front of the window, so that no one would ever say the world doesn't hold it against its mistakes. At the same moment, a cold wind swept through the street, extinguishing some nearby lights, making his reflection in the glass even clearer. Across town, she walked along the simple sidewalks of her neighborhood, smiling at the children playing in the street. The necklace, kept in a small wooden box beside her bed, reflected the soft moonlight streaming through the window. It was not a symbol of wealth, but of resilience. And so, silently, fate closed the cycle. A man surrounded by the emptiness of his own downfall, and a woman who moved forward, carrying not gold, but the intact dignity that could never be bought. If you've made it this far, I want to hear your opinion. What would you do in her place? Comment below, I'll read every answer. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and click on the video that's currently playing on your screen. I'm sure it will captivate you as much as this one.